All right, a couple weeks ago when we were switching out we did the struts and springs, which you may have seen, and we did a brake job. We didn't record that. It's just a pretty basic brake job. I know there's some other videos out there. But what we found when we were doing the brake job, just like you should always be prudent in doing, is just checking the other components of the vehicle. And I was rotating this hub when it had zero resistance, when the rotor, the caliper, all the pads were off, and I just didn't like the feel of this hub. So unfortunately, it led me to believe that the bearings were beginning to fail. So we took the other side apart, and sure enough, you could tell a drastic difference in the two. So we're back here today. We already did the brake job. So the good part is the rotor shouldn't be seized to the hub or anything. Hopefully everything will be loose. It was just about 2 weeks ago. And what I'm going to attempt to do here, and I think it's going to work out, is we have to pull the caliper off in order to get the rotor off, in order to get the hub off. And I'm going to try and pull this caliper off loaded. It's not the end of the world if we do have to take the pads out, but technically if we do take the pads out, we need to clean everything and with brake clean, put new adhesive on the pads, etc. So I've got a gigantic pair of slip joint pliers here, and sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't, but I'm just going to pull a little pressure on these pads and it's actually working. In fact, you want to turn the wheel, try to get a better view of it. Which way? To the right, all the way. Alright, perfect. So what we're going to do is, just like on a normal brake job, or when you're trying to take the pads off, there was a little bit of tension. I mean, the rotor's free, but we want to make it easier when we reassemble. So I'm just putting these pliers on the very edge of the pad and the caliper. And you have to be careful, because if you were just to yank on this, there is a chance you could damage the pad or the caliper. But I'm just going very easy. If it doesn't accomplish what we're looking for, I'll stop. Worst case, we can pull the pads out, but if I can pull a loaded caliper, it'll be much easier. I don't know if you can see that, but it immediately loosened up. So we're going to move forward with taking our caliper off here. And we do have this brake line we're going to have to loosen from the spindle.
Is the camera light okay? Is it blinding you?
Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, I don't even need this.
What can I do?
I'm okay right now. In addition to this, we're also going to take the brake line mount off the frame. And these two bolts are different here, so you just want to keep these separate.
Let me know if I'm blinding you in any way.
No, you're fine. So how's the new shock and strut assembly riding that we put on?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Little stiffer and tighter in the front end. Handles much more like a sport. Definitely takes the washboard brick roads here in Orlando much better. Speed bumps, no more bottoming out over the struts. So far, so good.
That's cool.
Definitely much improved.
Yeah.
Firmer ride on the highway, feels more stable, more flat-footed in the corners.
Nice. Yeah, anybody out there that's interested, this is becoming a common problem on the 4Runners, especially, I guess it'd be 03 to 09. And you can watch a video we did on replacing these struts and shocks. Now, there is an extra bolt down here that's part of this. Now, let's see. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen up that caliper and see if we've got everything loose. I might have to loosen up one other brake mount for one of the lines here, but I think we'll be okay. All right, we got a 17 millimeter that holds that caliper on. Now, one thing you want to be careful of, I'm not sure if you can see, but the brake line and the breaker bar are basically touching here. So if you were to crank down on this sucker, you would actually damage that brake line. So that's something you want to be careful of. We're going to move our position, or we're going to get an extension. In this scenario, we're going to get an extension. I don't know who put these calipers on. They're quite tight.
It's only been a week.
All right, caliper bolts are loose. Take the bottom out first.
Those brakes are feeling better now, by the way.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, I think the pads are seated or worn in, whatever you call it.
Oh, good.
A little more stopping power.
You think we need to bleed the brakes again, or are they feeling okay?
I'm not sure. I'll let you drive it. I'd rather just have you drive it.
All right, so before we get that bolt out, we need to figure out how we're going to anchor this caliper, because it's just going to drop, which we don't want it to do. We don't want to put any pressure on these lines. So a lot of people use wires, bungee cords. I've got a pack of zip ties here. So zip ties no fail. You know it's secure. It's not going to come loose, but any method is okay as long as it doesn't fall. Alright, we got our caliper loose here. Setting this sucker to the side.
You want me to help?
I'm okay. Actually, thank you. I actually need to use 2 zip ties on this just in case we need to, because we're going to need to straighten out this wheel. So we put one there, and then we're going to come. Looking for the cat. Alright, let's give that a try. Go and release it. Alright, so as you guys can see here, we've got our brake line, and then we've got an ABS sensor line here. But you know what? I don't like the way that looks, so we're gonna actually loosen that mount up down here.
Is that the ABS sensor?
Yeah.
You take it off before?
Yeah, we did. Do you mind loosening up the steering?
Straightening it up?
Yeah. Just go slowly. Keep going. Keep going. Actually, straighten it out. Keep going. All right, hold.
Right there?
Yep.
Shut it off?
Yep. mind just making sure, just kind of holding that steady?
Sure.
For a second.
You were right about the rust.
What's that?
It's already started
Oh.
on the rotors. Brand new. We have to take off the EBS sensor, or ABS sensor, sorry.
Yeah, we're just gonna unplug it. I don't like, there's some tension on that line, and I'm not happy with it.
Stop video for a little bit.
Yeah, we'll be done just a second. Alright.
Let go.
Yep. Much better. Alright, crew. There's an ABS plug-in sensor. This is it unplugged here. And I was just not happy. It was creating some tension on that. We want absolutely zero tension on any of the lines. Oh, thank you for repositioning. So this was plugged in right here. Just need a small screwdriver. If you've never taken it off before, it can be a little bit of a trick. You do need some light, and then this bolted on right here. So as you can see, we had a little tension. So I unplugged this, unbolted that from the spindle, and we're completely loose. So I feel much better about that. All right, so at this point, we just did the brakes. Was it 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And the rotor is loose. If the rotor is not loose, chances are you're gonna have to put some penetrating oil on it. I usually use PV Blaster, use it for a long time. And then you're gonna wanna hit, be very strategic and careful, but you're gonna wanna hit pretty hard, usually with a ball peen hammer, in between the lug nuts, and just go around and around and around and around, and eventually it will loosen up, but it could take a little while. So since we're not gonna try and get these dirty, I'm going to actually,
I'll take it.
you mind taking it there? We'll set that to the side. You know what? I got a rag right over here. We can set it on. You got it?
Yeah. It's just the face. Don't touch the rim.
I'll stop the recording for just a second.
Sure. Rolling.
All right. We were able to remove the caliper and keep the pads in there. So I have a loaded caliper set to the side. We've got it tied up with zip ties. You can use wire, zip tie, bungee cord. I preferably usually use wire or zip tie to be sure it's not coming off. We did have to disconnect the ABS sensor on the back so that there wasn't tension on that. So we've got everything open, ready to go. Probably can't hear that, but we had a little bearing noise when we were doing the brake job, which led us to the point where we're at now with actually replacing the bearing. So there's 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. We got a 17 millimeter 6-point wrench here. I suspect these are going to be torqued down quite a bit, so recommend using a 6-point. And I don't see any way of getting a socket in there. You might be able to get a claw wrench fitting, but I wouldn't use a standard wrench, only if you had a claw. I guess that'd be a 5-point, almost like a line wrench claw. So we're going to start disassembling it. That wasn't too bad.
Turning the wheel.
What's that?
Turning the wheel.
Am I?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so we got all 4 of those loosened. Actually wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Did the new hub kit come with the bolts?
Yes.
Okay. Look at that puppy.
There's not a right and left, right? They're the same.
I would think so. Not 100%, but
Remember I told you the shipping label was weird? Southeast Toyota. So does the dealer make them, or does he just buy the hubs from there and reuse the box?
oh, I was gonna actually suggest that. I was thinking that's what he does.
What?
I bet he buys the hubs.
Oh. Yeah, because the two-wheel drive model is supposed to have genuine Toyota hubs, and the four-wheel drive models have the dormant hubs that are a little cheaper.
Okay.
That's why the two-wheel drive is $100 more than the...
Where did they ship from on that Toyota?
These?
Yeah.
Southeast Toyota, Jacksonville, Florida. Lexus. Toyota Lexus. So that's probably where the hub assembly... Actually, it says hub assembly. So he buys the hubs and then... Surely you can't buy this whole unit from them. Already assembled and then just be a reseller. That'd be pretty sweet. Shit, I'd start an e-commerce store if that was the case.
I never checked with Toyota.
I did.
Did you?
Toyota Orlando wouldn't sell me a unit. They said they'd rebuild it. It's $1,100 was the quote.
Each or both?
For both. That was not replacing anything. That was taking the OEM stuff apart, replacing with a 10-pin bearing, and then replacing the two seals with a Toyota seal. So most of it was labor. Because the bearings are only $80
Yeah.
by themselves. And then, of course, they'll press it all back together and reassemble it. It's all labor, though.
So for those of you out there trying to find the parts, you find out the bearing's bad, something we just went through. Matt will probably talk a little bit more about it, but you can buy the bearing for about $100 a side. Now the issue becomes is you have to be able to press the bearing and seals out and repress it back into the assembly. And the additional issue is if that person doesn't know what they're doing, they can gravely damage the hub housing. I mean, I've pressed in the shop days. I mean, I used to press bearings in and bushings and things. It does take a little practice. It takes a little feel. So one, we didn't want to go to a shop that did not know what they were doing and actually damage these hubs. And two, we were trying to find a reseller that actually did a very good job and see if they sold the whole hub assembly, because even the shops that we both called around to, it was quite expensive for them to press the bearings in and out.
No puller needed. The only thing the guy did say was make sure we remember the position of the guard.
Yeah.
Or whatever you call it.
That. Alright, so getting these 4 bolts, I think they're pretty much loose. And I'm just going to see, we did get a slide hammer in case we needed it. I don't like the idea of really beating on this thing, but it's definitely loosened up some. Let's go ahead and give that a whirl. See if we can get that pulled out of here.
You need 2 lug nuts. Right?
Was there another claw attachment?
No, that's the one I got.
This is the only one?
No, actually there's a deep well. This one.
Let's try it.
But this was for the, that's for this puller. Might be the same thread though. Doesn't fit?
We're not going to have enough bite from the lugs.
Can you try one of the other holes?
What's that?
Doesn't matter.
See what I mean? It's not...
See if this is the same thread.
Well, I don't think that's going to work.
Why? Try that. No.
It's not wide enough. Now this works. Actually,
might just need to pull on it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
See how far these thread on there. Because they're recessed a little bit. Let's try it.
What's you want to do is fuck up one of your studs.
Well, we're not going to pull on it hard knowing that there's only a few threads on there, right?
Man, I don't like that. We'll only make one or two.
Alright. So I need a different attachment head?
Alright, so we had all these bolts loose and we had secured a slide hammer because what I did not want to do is beat on this this hub assembly. One, if you're reusing it, you don't want to beat on it. But two, I didn't want to damage the machine housing that it came out of with the spindle. So unfortunately, the slide hammer attachment we have, because of this hub lip, we can only get maybe 1 to 2 threads on there with the lug nut, and I'm just not comfortable. I mean, it'll pull those threads right off. So these come in handy quite a bit, these large channel lock pliers, slip joint pliers. So what I did was I just opened them up, and one thing you want to make sure is the position of this back plate here. So that's already loose. I opened these up and I just ever so slightly pulled on it and they came right out. And we had the back plate there, and we had the O-ring gasket, and we've got the actually this is the ABS sensor here. Now the interesting part is it looks like you have to take that ABS sensor out, but you do not. That can stay in place. So we're going to clean up this housing a little bit, and we're going to get ready to assemble it back together. All right, we're going to do a little cleaning of this hub area. Now since we did leave the caliper here, I'm actually going to put a shield in place so we don't get I end up coating that caliper, and then we have to re-grease everything. So we're going to use some handy brake clean, one of my favorite cleaning tools. Just going to give that a little spray. We got a little wire brush here. There's a little rust buildup on the edges here. This brake clean is going to dry quickly. We had a little rust intrusion that started on the bottom of this housing. It's not actually where the bearing seats, but on the lip. And that seal had started to fail a little bit, so we're just gonna try and get as much of that off as we can. But I tell you what, for 10 years, this thing looks pretty good. Next thing we're gonna do is I've got a little use any type of fine grit. I've got a little 200 here. Anything that you have will help on a flat surface, and we're just going to run a little sandpaper across this machine surface to help. We'll give that brake clean just a second to dry. And the reason we're using brake clean versus like a carburetor cleaner, etc., is the brake clean will not leave any residue, just like if you were to use it on the brake part. So we don't want any residue left here. All right. Yeah, it's cleaning that up nice. You just want to knock that surface rust off there.
You want shop towels?
Sure, that'd be great. And for you guys that are in a shop that have the the small rotary tool, the air tool. If you have that handy, that would help, but it's not completely necessary. We're going to make this work just fine. And there was some rust in those bolts I took off, so we're going to go ahead and spray those holes out too. Hopefully get any of that residue out.
I didn't get the Loctite. Do we need to get some?
Nah, I'm not worried about it. Alright, I don't know if you guys can see that surface from here, probably. But we're able to get a lot of the residue off. You know what, I'm going to give it... I'm actually going to give it one more hit. It doesn't hurt, we've got it here. Might be a little overkill, but if we can get it just a little cleaner, I'd be happy. Remember, it's always easier to clean or to prep now versus get something back together and have an issue with it, so. Brake clean is Matthew's absolute favorite item to clean with. He loves this.
I love how it eats the paint away on everything. It does work well.
Alright, so we've got a pretty darn good surface there. I mean, I took off, some of that paint was from the original spindle housing, so not quite worried about it. We're going to give this, the edge of the housing an additional brush. Give one other brake clean squirt here. And one thing I'm not doing, but I recommend, especially with using brake clean, making sure you have some eye protection. Which I'm not listening to my own advice here, but I have gotten brake clean in my eyes before, and it does not feel very good. So I'm quite pleased. You think that looks pretty good?
Yeah.
Now we have a machine surface where the bearing sits, and then this lip here is actually a polished surface, which has had a little rust abrasion. Looks like moisture may have seeped in over time. So when we do the reinstall, I'm going to put the slightest layer of grease just on this surface. Not a lot, just a little bit, just to coat it and hopefully provide some protection for another 10 years of use. And on this backing plate here, well, two things. One, you see these little indentations, and what that does is it matches the back of the backing plate. So you definitely want to make sure you have this on before you reinstall it. But you see those indentations here, little dimples here, and they match here. So when you do, we go to put it back together, you can tell that plate sits right there. While I got the plate here, we're going to go ahead and give this a little squirt of brake clean. This backing plate's probably never been off the vehicle. Not really worried about this too much, just want to get these areas clean here that bolt up to the hub. And then on the front side, now a lot of this equipment is relatively clean too, because we did a brake job 2 weeks ago. You haven't driven very far, right? And we cleaned all this thoroughly with brake clean. So if you haven't had your vehicle apart for a while, or if you live in the north, this part could be a lot worse. Alright, so we've got some good surfaces on both of those. Get a little splash there?
No, I was from the plate before I started.
Okay. Alright, now on our bearing here, I'm about to do the reassembly. Before I get fully involved with it, I'm going to wash my hands, but we have this O-ring that's on the bearing, or on the hub assembly. So we're going to mount the plate, and then we're going to start bolting everything back together. That O-ring is going to sit right in here in that polished area and provide some protection. As I mentioned, we're just going to put a little bit of grease. We don't want a lot at all. We just want a very little thin layer, because we did have some water intrusion there. I'm not sure if it's from failure of the O-ring or what, but gonna get cleaned up. We'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
All right, so we got everything cleaned up. We got our hands cleaned up. We don't want to get any of the dirty grease or anything back in the housing. What I mentioned before briefly was we had some rust on this polished edge. We have a milled edge here where the bearing goes in, and then a polished edge. And this O-ring sits right inside that polished area, but what I'm going to do is just put a very, very thin layer of grease to try and help prevent any further rust issues. It's probably not even needed. I mean, it's been 10 years, but we're just going to put a very thin layer on. And I'm just using like a chassis grease here.
That is thin. I can't even see it.
And I'm gonna extend that just a little bit in the machined area. Not a lot, but just a little bit in the machined area as well. So what that's going to enable us to do is just give us a little extra lubrication when you go to set that bearing in. So we just put a little on the milled surface, ran our finger in the machine area just a little bit. Oh, thank you. And we have a little on the edge. That shouldn't be a problem. Just give it a quick wipe down. Alright. We've got our plate here. Again, we've got the dimples lined up. It's very nice Toyota did that for us. Now this is where it'll help to have an extra set of hands here just holding that. Otherwise it'd be quite difficult on your own. Alright, so make sure that you have that O-ring on there. Either if you're doing your own hubs or if it doesn't come with it. Anyways, you need to make sure that O-ring's on. So we're going to try and just set it as square as possible. These bolts have something on it already.
Yeah. Never cease.
Something on
Never cease.
Yeah. Alright, so what I did was we just squared that up as best we could. Started these bolts. Oh, I'm sorry. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
I want to start them by hand, and then whatever you do, want to make sure they're not cross-threaded. Something like this actually could be a little easy to cross-thread. We got 4 we're trying to start. while we're trying to hold the hub, and then if you're trying to hold the plate or you have somebody to help you. But it's going in there quite nicely. I think the grease actually on the edge of that housing helped. And it's actually, we're able to basically push the bearing all the way in by hand. How's the plate look?
Feels flat. You wiggle it a little bit. Yeah, it's good.
And what we want to do is just kind of evenly tighten up all these bolts. And the reason we want to go evenly is we want to gradually pull that bearing and seat that into place. And once we start torquing them down, you'll see we'll go gradual on each one as well. So we're just going gradual, maybe quarter turn on each, all the way around. Alright, now that we've got them all hand tight, or I'm sorry, not hand tight, but just tightened up with the wrench, we're going to start doing our torquing. Wow, this new bearing, you can tell a huge difference.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Holy shit. It's pretty stiff.
Yeah.
Is there like a break-in for that? No.
I should loosen up a little bit. But then again, the other one was worn as hell.
Do we have to do torque specs for those or no?
I'm not going to.
Just do it by feel?
Yeah. I don't know what the actual torque specs are for these. I mean, they're grade 8 bolts. So.
As tight as you can get them.
Yes. Good. Alright, so we're going to go and tighten these down. We've got a 6-point wrench here. Want to make sure you're using a 6-point, not a 12. If you are using a 12, these will round off. Go around one more time here. Can't get that one any tighter. Alright, we're going to make a modified breaker bar here. Probably not necessary, just make sure we get a little more torque. If you guys have ever done this with a wrench, you can slide the close end over the open end. Just be careful if you've never done it. If you don't have it seated just right, it can slip on you. But oh yeah, we got a little extra turn on that. Oh, those are nice and tight. Very pleased with that. I got probably an extra 1/8 of a turn out of each. Sure, we're a little tighter than might need to be, but on the suspension components. I want to try and be as tight as possible. So there we go. We got that new hub in place, and we're going to start reassembling the caliper. All right, so we got the hub assembly, these 4 bolts on. Now we're going to set the rotor on, and we're in the reassembly mode. So do you have that rotor close by? The brake rotor?
Oh, yeah.
I tell you what, doing any of this stuff, if you have someone with an extra set of hands, it's a huge help. Thank you very much.
Got it. You want me to hold it?
Now what we're going to do is, temporarily, since we've got to set that caliper on with the loaded pads in it, I don't always do this, but I'm just going to go ahead and put 2 lug nuts on here so it keeps the rotor fixed in place. It should help sitting that loaded caliper back on. And when I say loaded, I just mean that it's got the pads in it. Alright, got our side cutters here. Going to cut this caliper free.
I'm making it worse.
No. Right there. Perfect. Thank you. Got it. And we've got these 2 bolts that hold the caliper on. Let's start the top one, start the bottom one. I'm going to reattach our brake lines, our brake line mounts. We actually haven't disconnected the brake lines, thankfully.
Should have gotten more fluid to bleed them again.
Let's see how it's right.
Didn't think about it. That's awesome. They don't have to reassemble all that shit.
Right. So what we did is we kept the pads in. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to pull them out, but if you pull them off, I mean, you should really clean everything with brake clean and use the high temp grease. But we were going to try and save probably about half an hour each side, and we did it successfully. So we're going to reattach our brake line mounts. We're going to reattach our ABS sensor. And you know what? Let's go ahead and get a shot of that ABS sensor on the reattachment.
You want me to come over there? Or turn the wheel, you mean?
Yeah, let's turn the wheel all the way to the left.
Hands clear?
Yes, thank you. Hands are clear.
Keep going?
Okay, that's good.
Shut it off?
Shut off.
So you want me to come over there?
Yeah, that would make it easier. All right, this is what we disconnected before because we had some tension on the ABS sensor. So this is just a little clip here. Get a small screwdriver in there. You can pop that off. Clips right back on. It's got 1 bolt that holds the sensor line bracket on. And we're just going to go ahead and tighten that back up. But I just want to show you guys, this is what we also had to take off because otherwise you're going to have tension on that up top here, and we don't want to potentially damage that line at all.
And then in the back there, those are the caliper bolts.
Yep, exactly. These are the caliper bolts we just started. They're loose. We're going to tighten those up, and then we'll be good to go. Cool.
You want the wheel back straight or just leave it?
Yeah, actually.
Hands?
Yep.
Say when.
When? So video on?
Yeah. Can we turn it off?
Oh, we're good. All right, we're gonna reattach our brake line mounts. We have one on the frame and one on the spindle. And just one quick note for you guys. I'm not sure if you can see these two bolts here. One of them appears to be self-tapping and the other is just a machine screw. So when I took this apart to do the brakes, I got these two bolts mixed up. I couldn't figure out which went to which, and then I did a little examination. And this frame here, the frame area where it mounts on, is actually a hollow piece of steel. So that led me to believe, and we did confirm, that's where the self-tapping one went. And just the non-self-tapping machine bolt went into the spindle because this is a solid surface. So it might not be something that you come across, but just in case you do, you know which way the bolts go. I'm actually going to grab a wrench for this top one here. And I took it off. It was a little tight. The socket was against the brake line. Probably be okay, but we got a wrench here. Might as well be safe. That's good and tight. Remember when we back this out and we're done, pump up the brakes because we won't have any compression on them. So anytime that you compress the pistons here, and it usually only takes one time to ever forget doing this, when you get in the vehicle to back it out and you press on the brake, your brake's going to go all the way to the floor. What happens is you're going to have to press up a couple times, or sorry, pump the brakes a couple times just to get that compression back on the brake pads. And you want to do it before you get rolling, because if not, you have the potential to run into something. Just the wind.
Yeah, it looks like it's gonna pour. Yeah, I thought that was only the case when you separate the brake lines and you have to bleed them. But last time,
Does it look nasty out there?
yeah.
Oh wow, I can feel the air. It's cold.
Is there a way that I can prop this open to keep the ventilation, or
Yeah.
instead of closing it?
Let's figure out this part.
Please stay in here. Yeah.
Here.
Feels nice, huh? Just going to it, so.
Do you mind turning the wheel all the way to the right again?
To the right or to the left?
To the right.
Clear?
Clear. Perfect. So we're going to tighten up these caliper bolts. We just have more room if we turn the wheel. A lot of wind.
Yeah. Still tornado warnings?
I don't know.
So what's the right name for this? Wheel hub bearing assembly?
Yeah.
Or wheel bearing hub assembly?
You won't be able to get those off without a breaker bar.
Run it straight?
Yep. We got our line tight.
There.
Yep.
Left.
Line tight. Okay, we're good there.
Caliper tight.
Alright, we're good to go on this side. We got our new bearing on.
Stop the video.
And put our wheels on. We're good to go.